My name is Stephanie Pilot. I am the director of the Division of Architecture in the Christopher C. Gibbs College of Architecture here at OU. Those are my students. They think they're getting extra credit. Our architecture program is often referred to as the American School of Architecture because in the post-war years, we developed a really original approach to teaching design. At the time, most other schools were following either the German Bauhaus model or the French Beaux-Arts model. And OU took a completely different route. We were one of the few schools that didn't follow one of those models. And our approach was centered on the belief that our job as teachers is to bring out the individual creativity of each and every student, not to turn them into little versions of ourselves. That was a pretty radical idea. And if you have time today, I would encourage you to walk through the main corridor of Bazell Memorial Library, where we have an exhibition showcasing drawings from the 1940s and 50s by students of the American School. And they are radical in their creativity, I assure you. Today, our students are still known for their creativity, as well as for being resourceful, experimental, and contextual in their approach to design. They're also known for being among the most sought-after graduates in the country. In 2018, Design Intelligence ranked OU number 4 in the most hired from category. That put us ahead of MIT, UCLA, Princeton, and many other schools. And I can tell you that in 2018, in fact, almost 100% of our students had jobs within 6 months of graduation, except for 2. They went on to Harvard Graduate School of Design. So we're still proud of them, and we will encourage them to come back. Now, I want to introduce our next speaker, Dylan Thuras. He is the co-founder and creative director of Atlas Obscura. Atlas Obscura is an online media company as well as an incredible book. It has been #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. And Atlas Obscura, as you're going to learn today, really inspires wonder and curiosity about some of the world's less well-known sites, including showcasing a database of over 17,000 different sites around the world. Dylan's pursuit of the unusual began as a teenager when he was exploring abandoned buildings in the upper Midwest. It eventually took him to Budapest, where he spent a year traveling and exploring Eastern Europe's obscure and wondrous locales. He now lives with his wife and 2 young children in New York's Hudson Valley. Please help me welcome Dylan Thuras.
Hi, everybody. Hello, can you hear me okay? Yes, good, okay. So thank you so much for having me here. I wanted to say, first, some of the other speakers have had some really kind things to say about millennials. As the world's oldest possible millennial, 1982, I thank you, I take the compliments, I thank you, and I think that's right. Everything that was being said about sort of the shift with the ways millennials are approaching place is right. I tried to, so this talk is Explorers in Action, so I tried to choose my most calendar beefcake explorer photo I could find. What you can't see in this photo is my absolute terror. I actually took my shoes, if you look closely, I took my shoes off because I thought somehow that would be safer, I don't know. Anyway, so this is New York where I've lived for a long time. And it's a wonderful city. It's actually a little bit of this is the Chrysler Building, and it's the floor where all the Eagles are. And the floor of that building has been vacant for a couple of decades, and it's a real crime, because this is one of the great architectural wonders of New York. But I didn't grow up in New York. I grew up in the Midwest. And I showed this slide actually as it's like a small personal joke, because I think when I tell people that I'm from the Midwest, this is what they imagine. From folks from Oklahoma, I assume you can relate to that idea. But in fact, I grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and it looked more like this. And so this actually this building in Minneapolis, Gold Medal Flower, it was the first structure, the first building I ever fell in love with. It was this massive, massive 9-story structure on the Mississippi River. And buildings like this, these enormous mills, this was once one of the largest mills in the world. This is the Washburn A Mill. They defined Minneapolis, these giant mills along the Mississippi. This mill could produce enough flour in a day to bake 12 million loaves of bread. But early in its existence, it suffered a giant flour explosion and had to be rebuilt. But it continued to do milling for a long time, but by the 1960s, the flour milling business had really left Minneapolis. It had been replaced by other economic drivers like the arts and advertising. And so this building became basically a giant remnant of a Minneapolis that no longer existed. It was vacant by the 1960s. And by the 1990s, a devastating fire destroyed a large part of this building. Now, as a teenager in Minneapolis, by the way, I thought I looked like that one, but I definitely looked like the other one. So as a teenager in Minneapolis, I was a straight edger. I was kind of a punk kid, but I didn't, as a straight edger, means you don't drink, you don't do any drugs. But as a teenager, I still had to get into trouble somehow. And for me, what that meant was being drawn to buildings like Gold Medal Flower, and particularly, my first love was art and drawing. And I'm a little bit nervous to tell you guys this because I feel like there's a good portion of this room that probably sees this as a real scourge, but I fell in love with graffiti. And the thing that was so incredible about graffiti as a teenager is it gave you permission to explore your city like nothing else did. Suddenly, you were clued into this secret language that was across the entire urban landscape. And it brought you to the alleyways, to the undersides of bridges, to rooftops. Suddenly, the city took on this incredible 3-dimensional scale. And it was this kind of mythical playground all of a sudden. And I have to say, you know, if you ever want to think what you will about graffiti kids, but if you talk to them about their city, they'll probably know more about the infrastructure and layout of any given city. So the reason I really love this, I love the art. I would find these little spots hidden away where I could spend hours painting, making something really big and beautiful. But the other reason is it gave me an excuse to explore spaces like Gold Medal Flower. And so back then, the huge sign, this huge neon sign was off, had been off for decades. But it called to me, and the space, because it was so large and called to so many other kids like me in Minneapolis, it became this kind of communal space with all of this mythology around it. You'd go into this 9-story building, and every week there was new artwork on the wall, something new to explore. And you'd run into people and you'd talk to them. And there were these myths about the building that there were these tunnels that ran under it that only a few people had ever gotten into. And you know, it was scary and then there were these kind of joyous moments. When I was 16, I snuck up on the roof of Gold Medal Flower for July 4th to watch the fireworks. The fireworks are set off right by this building. And what I found when I got up there was 30 other people who'd had the same idea and brought beer. And I didn't drink the beer then, but everyone was hanging out and having this wonderful time, having this wonderful party and really sharing in this kind of communion of space. So even though the light was off, it was like this beacon that brought kids who were exploring their city together. But the truth is, my environment, my sort of Midwestern environment, had already started to shape me in ways I didn't quite realize. When I was younger, before I was a teenager, just as a kid, as a 10, 11-year-old, my parents would take me on these quintessentially Midwestern road trips. And you know a Midwestern road trip, it's like it takes 7 hours to get between two things. And you know, we'd go to places like Waldrug in South Dakota, the Corn Palace, which is literally just a giant building covered in corn. And when I was 12, we went to a place that I've never forgotten, and I still hold very fondly in my heart. Went to Spring Green, Wisconsin, to a place called the House on the Rock. And does anyone know the House on the Rock? Is anyone familiar with it? I wonder, this may or may not fit into like the American School of Architecture. So it has a mythology around it. There was a guy named Alex Jordan Jr., an architect. And Frank Lloyd Wright was working quite close to here, Taliesin. And Alex Jordan Jr. got his drawings together and went to Frank Lloyd Wright and showed them his plans. And Frank Lloyd Wright said, "I would not hire you to build a cheese crate or a chicken coop." And sent Alex Jordan Jr. packing. Well, Alex Jordan Jr. was not having it. He was going to have his architectural revenge. So he built this bizarro, you can call it, if you want, a Frank Lloyd wrong. So it's Frank Lloyd Wright-esque, but it is all sort of weird. The proportions are bizarre. But then the thing that happened, as a 12-year-old, I kind of could have, that wasn't that interesting to me. But what happened with this building is that it slowly started to add more and more pieces to it. And over the decades, it grew into this sprawling, endless maze. Takes about 5 or 6 hours to walk through the entire thing. And inside of this bizarre house, there is the world's largest carousel, holding the world's most diverse set of carousel animals. It has this crazy cantilevered hallway that looks like it goes on into infinity. And apparently there was something about making a giant cantilevered thing that was also like an architectural screw you to Frank Lloyd Wright. I don't know. And then it has a sculpture of a squid fighting a whale, the size of the Statue of Liberty, inside this house. And as a 12-year-old, I thought, if this is what is in the woods of Wisconsin, what is in the world? So you know, all of these things together eventually kind of synthesized ultimately in co-founding this company called Atlas Obscura. So we do a few different things at Atlas Obscura. Our core mission is about giving people this sense of curiosity and wonder in the world around them. Sometimes people describe us as a travel company, but that's not quite right, because we're really about making the familiar strange, awakening your sense of the wonders that are in your own backyard. And the core of what we do is that we're this database of 17,000 places. People send us buildings, art projects, natural locations that they think deserve to be celebrated, and we have an editorial team that turns those around. We wrote a book. I just went on a big book tour for a kid's book. I have to say, once you've tried to speak in front of a group of 300 7th graders, every other audience is way less intimidating. So that was a good practice for me. We throw events. We have events chapters all around the US, and we create these sort of unexpected experiences. This is at the Explorers Club in New York, which is this 19th century club that has all these artifacts from Arctic and Antarctic explorations, and we had a sleepover there. We do this big event each year called Into the Veil. We've done it in a few different cities. This is from the Brooklyn one. It's a little dark, but we're going here into the catacombs of the cemetery. And what's interesting, this is in Greenwood in Brooklyn, and Greenwood was this great, maybe the most beautiful Victorian cemetery in all of the US, and it was really designed for people to come there and participate. And so this was our chance to kind of make that a reality. We also now run trips all around the world. So we sort of wanted to put our money where our mouth is, and so this is a trip we took to Bulgaria, this is a place called Bazludza. I don't know why we went there in the winter. That was a mistake. It's very cold. But this is this giant, incredible abandoned communist monument, one of the greats. But it's a rich category. And frankly, we run tours that basically do nothing but go to these spomenics, these huge brutalist monuments across Eastern Europe. And all of this is to back up this fundamental notion that Atlas Obscura, it's not a bucket list. It's not a travel plan. It is a framework of seeing. It's a sort of a dedication to curiosity and a way to seek meaning from that experience of wonder, when you see something that truly surprises you. And that, of course, can happen anywhere. Here in Norman, you have the largest skull of any land-walking animal ever to exist, the Pentaceratops at the Sam Noble Museum. And so we try and remind people that even just a mile from their house, which is about how far this is from here, there's something incredible to see and experience. And because, you know, at Alice Obscura, look, I can neither draft architectural plans, nor can I make policy. So it's questionable why I'm talking to you guys. But I do spend a lot of time thinking about place. And because we're not architects and we're not planners, we think about place in terms of story. And so for us at Alice Obscura, placemaking is myth-making. The connection between place and story is not just sort of casual, it is causal, it is essential, and that storytelling can change the outcome of places. So this idea of myth-making around places is very, very important to us at Alice Obscura. It's actually from another tour we run to Pripyat, which is the former town in Chernobyl that was abandoned. What's interesting about Pripyat is that people expect it to be this sort of terrible disaster zone, but in fact is a beautiful natural environment now. 30 plus years without people have turned it accidentally into an incredible park. And like the elk have come back, and the wolves are back, and the boars are back. And yes, they're all a little bit radioactive, but it's okay. It's okay. They're actually, that is less harmful to them than just humans' presence was. So, you know, we think about this question of what defines a place, and obviously this comes up in placemaking a lot. And, you know, there's this idea that the term genius kind of comes originally from this idea of like genie. It was like an animating spirit. And places had genius loci, the spirit of the place, the thing that made it what it was. It was how you described a place long after you left. I think is interesting is a lot of places, you know, they're more myth than they are place, that the version of them we hold in our minds is much bigger than their actual footprint in the world. Las Vegas is probably the greatest example of this, but it is the myth of morality unbound, where a place where money is meaningless and you can go there and it flows in and flows out at random. And I think the sort of what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas campaign is one of the most effective myth-making campaigns in history. And so the Las Vegas that exists in all of our heads is vastly larger than the footprint of the city, but it has real impacts on how the city functions in the world. All of that mental real estate really does interact with the physical real estate. Other places are even more fundamentally myth more than place. This is Plymouth Rock, where the Pilgrims landed. Yeah, I'm glad that's the reaction. So the thing about Plymouth Rock is a couple of problems. One, no one really talked about it. Like the Pilgrims weren't like, oh yeah, Plymouth Rock. Like there was some mention of a rock, but then it wasn't for 120 years when the town found the oldest living person and took him to the beach and he said, it's that one. And he was not alive when this happened, but he said, oh, I know for sure. So this rock was moved around and it broke in half. But you know, Plymouth Rock really comes from that period in the 1700s when they needed to create these founding mythologies, these founding moments and monuments. And so they kind of just made one. And unfortunately, I mean, also that narrative excludes a lot of other narratives, as Malcolm X famously said, you know, Plymouth Rock, we didn't land on Plymouth Rock, Plymouth Rock landed on us. And so this is a place that is built from mythology. And the plus side of this is that in the work I do, you know, that sort of Plymouth Rock is a good example of the way, some of the negative ways in which mythology and place can interact or come together. But I also get to see some of the really positive ways that mythology and storytelling about place can impact a location. So this, about 3 months after we started the business in 2009, we were just getting going. I mean, I was doing this from my kitchen table, and someone submitted an entry. And it said, I run a small bed and breakfast in Cherrapunji, India, which is in northern India. And it's one of the wettest regions in the world. They get more rain here than almost anywhere else. And the person writing it said, there are these things here that nobody knows about, but they're one of the most incredible examples of architecture in the world. And he went on to describe these. These are known as the living root bridges of Cherrapunji. And so these are made by taking the living roots of two Ficus elastica trees, growing them together, letting them interweave, and over 10 or 15 years, you create this piece of living infrastructure. There's really nothing like this anywhere else in the world, but people were not coming to see these. In fact, they were in danger of disappearing. People were putting up steel cable bridges. They were not taking care of these. Sometimes they're like latex trees, so sometimes the latex was being drained out of the tree and it causes the bridges to die. You know, and some of these bridges are over 500 years old. The reason, by the way, this one is a double-decker is because it's so wet there that during the rainy season, that river goes all the way up to the bottom of that second level. But luckily, these living root bridges, unlike other kinds of infrastructure, survive that wetness just fine. I'm happy to report that 10 years later, and it wasn't just because of us, but at the time when we got this submission, there was almost nothing on the internet about these and very little out in books as far as we could find. 10 years later, though, there is a big sustainable tourism movement around this. There is kind of other economic industries that have sprung up around these bridges. And there's a whole campaign to find other examples. This is one, probably the most famous example of these, but actually it turns out there are dozens of these spread across India, and it may become almost like a root bridge trail. This is another place that benefited from having its story told. This is the Quechua Chaka, or the last Incan bridge in Peru. So there's a couple of things that make this bridge absolutely incredible. So this bridge is woven entirely out of grass. So there's this kind of shrubby hay-like material that grows here. And it is interwoven together to create this enormous 75-foot suspension bridge. I have to say, about 3 months after I was here, this bridge was cut down. So this bridge is not there anymore, but the good news is that is as it should be, because every year, the entire 4 communities that live around here come together. They weave a new bridge because it's made out of grass, so it starts to degrade. And they cut down the old one, and this goes back to the Incan Empire. It is a direct line back to Incan times, made today exactly as it was then. It's this piece of Incan technology that still exists. And no one was coming to see this. The villages around this were quite poor. And meanwhile, Machu Picchu was being overrun with tourists. It's just like the hillsides are going to slide off. And now that's changed a little bit. And so people are coming here. They charge a little fee now to cross the bridge, and that fee is building schools in the area. I'm going to give you one more example that's a little closer to home. This is in Tonopah, Nevada. This is the Clown Motel. As you can see, it is the last place to stay at the edge of the desert before you just go into no man's land. And it's clown themed. So the lobby has like 700 plus clowns in it. The rooms all have portraits of clowns. This was opened in the 90s, so it's been there for a while. It also happens to be next to an abandoned miners' graveyard, a 120-year-old miners' graveyard that, anyway, so this was all as it was, just kind of sitting there. And then a few years ago, about 6 years ago, the internet, Atlas Obscura and other people kind of caught wind of this, started telling its wonderful story, and something kind of amazing happened. People started showing up. People started making road trips to the Clown Motel. And one Instagrammer basically said, you know, no trip to Las Vegas is complete without a road trip out to the Clown Motel. This comic book artist, Chris Sabella, on a dare put up a Kickstarter that said it was like $10,000, so it was kind of serious. He said, if you fund this Kickstarter, I'll go live in the Clown Motel for a month. It got well funded, and then he spent the next month like blogging his slow descent into insanity. But you know, it's a funny example, but I bring it up for a couple of reasons. It actually matters to the town of Tonopah. Tonopah has 2,500 people in it. It's a great little historic town. It has a cool old hotel that is, you know, haunted, and it's got a mine you can tour. It's got all of this wonderful stuff. And by having this kind of mythology of the Clown Motel attached to it, it has really helped the town. And I think it's just that is kind of one of the amazing things I get to watch happen, is that while certain cities are completely overwhelmed with tourists, Venice, Barcelona, places like this, it just takes having their story told to kind of start to create real change for them. You know, I think that nothing destroys meaning and mythology faster. This is the requisite pour one out for Penn Station moment that should happen in any architecture or preservation conference. Like, nothing destroys a place quicker than tearing down its architectural history, because it doesn't just take the beautiful building with it. It takes meaning and mythology with it. And nothing helps a place thrive than finding ways to reuse and save architecturally valuable places, historic places. And sometimes they may not even be that beautiful, but sometimes if they have a lot of meaning, they still matter and should still be preserved. I have gotten to experience sort of the real effects of placemaking personally as of late, because I moved out of New York City a couple of years ago and moved to a small town, tiny town in upstate New York called Rosendale. It's about 1,500 people on the main street, and you can drive through it in 2 minutes. It's a town that could be a total nothing, but little did I realize when I moved there, I was moving to a hub of placemaking. There are a couple of things that have happened along the way that are kind of incredible. So, one, in the 1970s, Rosendale was on the edge of complete dissolution. It was going bankrupt, all the businesses were closed up, and then this conceptual artist named Ravio Poussemp showed up. And this guy, his ideas were all about using persuasion as art. So he had a famous piece where he said to a friend, "I wonder what would happen if you just roped off the sidewalk. Would people walk around it or they go under it?" And then his friend went and did that, and that was actually the art piece, was getting his friend to do his art for him. So it's slightly perverse, but he got it in his mind that his next piece was going to be Rosendale. So he came to Rosendale, and he ran for mayor, and then he had an extremely reasonable plan, which is that they dissolved the little town of Rosendale, which was paying its own taxes, into the larger kind of district hamlet of Rosendale, which meant that suddenly there was some money available, everyone was not paying these extra taxes, and then all of these artists were invited up, and suddenly the town was totally revitalized. So this is sort of the first moment of placemaking that happened. And even though the town kind of fell on hard times again since then, it's done these other things along the way. And it's interesting because when you live in a big city, it's easy to think of the changes around you as almost being these organic processes, these natural things that happen. And probably not for the people in this room, but I think for a lot of people it's sort of like, oh, it's like the seasons, things are just changing. But when you're in a town of this size, you suddenly realize how important decisions like this can be. So another thing the town did is that they saved their theater. This is a theater from the turn of the century. It was a casino first, and then it was a vaudeville and a burlesque place. And after owning it for 50 years, the family was going to give it up. The town is in 2009, came together, raised $500,000, saved the theater, and it's still run as a nonprofit today. And I'm happy to say I'm a part of the board there. And it's just another example of the kind of decision. This could easily have just disappeared, and it could be, you know, well, it wouldn't be a Walmart, but, you know, something smaller like that. They also saved their trestle bridge. So this was a gigantic trestle bridge that had been abandoned for years, and for a while was being used as a bungee jumping platform. And there was a very famous town council meeting where someone went there and just said, "Ah!" That is what everyone's going to hear every 5 minutes if we keep going with this. But the town was able to get control of this, and now this is part of a Rails to Trails program, so it connects some other paths along the way. And all of this is to say that these are decisions that were made by a group of people had to come together to make these things happen. And they absolutely define this town. Without these things, Rosendale would sort of just dissolve away. And I think they're important because they provide the surface for myth making, both for a couple of reasons. One, they're communal spaces. People can walk across that bridge and run into each other. And two, the theater brings them together. But two, these are places that have seen the entire history of this town, really. And so they provide all of this kind of structure for myth-making, for creating the mythology of the town of Rosendale. We also have, of course, a Dollar General, as does much of rural America now. And Dollar General is a tough place to attach mythology to. It's out of space, it's out of time. There's no local mythology to give to a Dollar General. If people were here for the presentation this morning, that sort of comparison of Walmarts and McDonald's around the country, that's the problem. They take the possibility of creating meaning away from a community because they can't, there's just no surface on which to attach it. And I see, I'm preaching to the choir here, but I see just a lot of development being done in this way where it's sort of like solving logistics problems. There's not enough parking. Is it easy to drive to? Where's the big one-stop shopping center? And we all know what that solving for those problems gets you. It gets you this. And we have this all over the country now. And it's not great because it's not solving for the things you actually want to solve for. You want to make a place so great that people are willing to walk a mile to get there. This is Ghent in Belgium. It has terrible parking. You can't park anywhere near the city center of Ghent. No cars are allowed there, and yet it is an absolute wonderful place. They solve for the right problem, which is how do we make a place that people are desperate to spend time in. Fez didn't have to solve this problem because they already were constructed in such a way that did not allow cars, but that was to their great benefit because now they have the largest contiguous car-free area in the world, and like urban area in the world. And they've managed to preserve all of this history really because of that. I work with a lot of tourism bureaus, and many tourism bureaus, they want to sell you on their golf courses and their restaurants and their shops. And I end up saying to them, look, every place in the world really has golf courses and restaurants and shops. What is it that makes you truly unique that you can tell people? And it's possible that there's such a thing as being too honest, but I don't know, it's kind of intriguing. And Australia's doing fine, and also this is true. I encourage destination marketing organizations, CVBs, tourism bureaus, to think about what their own genus loci is. What is the mythology of their place that makes it magical, that makes it special? And then how do they tell that story to the world? This has been a kind of a long, circuitous thing about myth making and the value of storytelling. So what does all of this mean for placemakers? I see certain things come up over and over again in the work that I do about places that are thriving, that people are excited to go to, that are transforming cities. So I'm going to go through pretty quickly here. This is Petite Ceinture in Paris. This is a giant, 32-kilometer long abandoned train line that ran around the entirety of Paris, basically, encircles the entire city. And it's just this beautiful, incredible space. And so they are now figuring out how the stations are being turned into bars. And this is basically to say old infrastructure is your friend. It can be rail lines, it can be tunnels, but these are opportunities for getting people in new parts of the city and transforming the way they experience it. And you can be creative about it. I mean, the rails thing is pretty well established. Rails to trails, the High Line, you think that would have convinced everybody of the value of this. It's still surprisingly hard. But other kinds of infrastructure that you might not even think of can be valuable. This is a water tower in New York City. There's a lot of water towers in New York City that are empty, actually. They have no water in them. And it was converted into a bar for 6 months. Now, this was definitely illegal, but it was also great. It was super, super awesome. So I just to sort of think about your city's infrastructure as opportunities to do something amazing. Art interventions can work wonders. And this is a guy named Rhodesworth in Montreal. He does all kinds of interesting, fun stuff. And I think it's important to not just sort of approach this thing and say, oh, we're going to paint a mural, but actually to allow a little bit of chaos into it. Art thrives on a little bit of chaos. Chaos is the soil that great art grows out of. And so maybe that means creating a section of the city where it's really, pretty much open season. The walls are just open. Imagine, I love the wraps on the electrical boxes, but what if you just zoned all of those as open art spaces, that anyone could come and sit on the sidewalk and paint on an electrical box? that creates an incredible opportunity. And you can imagine a city filled with people, showing up and adding new works to electrical boxes. I think it's worth kind of creating that space. This, by the way, is even better than you think it is. That's what happens when you drive by it. Art interventions are awesome. And Rhodesworth in Montreal, he gets up to all kinds of crazy stuff. This part of this same thing is love your weirdos. There are people in your city who are doing weird, amazing things, and they need civic support and civic help. This is Randyland in Pittsburgh. He's been running this place for 30 years. It's the most Instagrammed place in Pittsburgh now. It's this community garden. It's this art space. People come from around the country to see it, but it's also a community center where his neighbors come and meet and talk and hang out there. Randyland is absolutely incredible. And as I did this presentation, I realized I made a mistake. This whole presentation is focused largely on places, but that's not really it, because so many of these places thrive because of the people behind them. They're powered by these geniuses, really, these geniuses of place who create incredible spaces for people to congregate. So supporting those people like Sherry Elf at the Crochet Museum in Joshua Tree, she took an old photomat booth and turned it into the world-famous Crochet Museum. What's crazy about this is she doesn't even crochet. She gets it from the women of the area who crochet and sort of curates it. Noah Purfoy, also in Joshua Tree, created this incredible desert art gallery. These are the people creating senses of community and space that deserve civic support. This one I think everyone knows, but bookstores and libraries are magic. This is a little bit of a cheat, because this one is actually magic. It's the one from Harry Potter. It's in Diagon Alley. But the truth is, they really punch so far above their weight. Make a tiny library make a canoe library. Make a little library. If there's a bookstore in the town, do everything you can to keep it. They act as these anchor businesses and draws for communities in ways that I don't even quite know how to explain, but they are worth their weight in gold. Bookstores and libraries are essential. Art projects, big, crazy destination art projects. I know you guys have this, don't think I'm gonna get to see it, but Factory Obscura is this thing happening here that is absolutely incredible. That is the kind of place I will make a huge road trip just to go to. This one is actually, it's related. It's the House of Eternal Return by Meow Wolf in Santa Fe, another one of these art collectors. But this is the future of tourism. This is what it looks like for a city to make a great destination. It's a collective of artists given the space and freedom and support to create something totally amazing. Love your ruins, like loving your infrastructure. I think there's an impetus sometimes in architects to scrub everything clean, when you're doing adaptive reuse, to make everything look sort of new and shiny. But a stabilized ruin is a thing of beauty. And the more texture it has, the more surface area for attaching myth and story. And so this is Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia. It's a prison from 1820, and it's one of the most beautiful buildings in America because it is this stabilized ruin. It will never be made nicer than this. And last, think of myth-making as part of your infrastructure. When you're thinking about the assets of a place and what it needs and what it needs to grow, think about storytelling and myth-making as part of that. Think about convening a group of people to gather stories and figure out how to tell them. This is a parking garage in DC or in Virginia, and it doesn't look like much. It's not especially wondrous, but this is also the parking space where Mark Felt told Bob Woodward about what Nixon was up to and changed the course of American history. And this place was slated for demolition. I don't think it will actually get destroyed because of this. I love the person who taped up this historical marker and then said there's a fine for removal. It's like, I don't know how you're enforcing that. But this is a building being literally held up by its mythology. I mean, this is the thing that is keeping this building is its story. And so I want to sort of just come back at the end of this talk to return to the building I first fell in love with, this giant abandoned mill, Gold Medal Flour. And as I left Minneapolis and went off to college on the East Coast, Gold Medal Flour was undergoing its own transformation. Shortly after I left, they managed to get the neon sign turned back on. They took actually one of the most ruinous parts of the building and converted it to the Mill City Museum, which is this incredible museum dedicated to the history of milling in Minneapolis. And it is as interesting a museum dedicated to the history of flour milling could be. It's like as interesting as they can be, it is that interesting. They did a really, really good job. And in fact, there's on the 9th floor where I watched the fireworks on that wonderful July 4th as a teenager, there's now an observation deck where people can go up and look out. And curious, and there's also some apartments on the other side, which is sort of what funded all of this. And so it's got these 3 parts. It's got the apartments which fund it, it's got the incredible museum, it's got a stabilized ruin, and then the final part is still just a ruin. It's still just an abandoned space. They sort of boarded up. So for me, this building, it represents all of the things that I care about. It's both got the kind of allure of the ruin, but the beauty of that reuse, the beauty of turning that into something where people can gather. I mean, that's why I love this building, because it had this communal space. And they've made that kind of institutional and real and not, you know, kids sneaking in. So to me, this is a truly great place. Thank you so much for listening. Let's see, how'd I do on time? Oh, I'm over, so probably I have to go.
Yeah. You do have an opportunity to ask Dylan questions. He's going to be signing books right after this in the lobby. So if you do have a question, I'm going to ask that you take it to the lobby and ask him there. Thank you for a great talk.
Thank you so much. Thanks, guys.